Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of ForbesWomen. As of 1 p.m. on Tuesday, October 29th, more than 50 million early ballots have been cast for the 2024 presidential election. Here to tell us what this number means and what we should expect around voter engagement is Andrea Hailey. She is the CEO of Vote.org, the nation's largest voter engagement digital platform. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
These early voting numbers are somewhat amazing to me. I checked this morning, it was 48 million. I checked this afternoon, we're up to 50 million. Let's start broad. What do these figures mean to you, and how remarkable are they compared to prior election cycles?
These figures mean that the American public is really excited to have their voice heard this election cycle. These narratives about apathy and exhaustion just are not true. People are showing up and they want to participate. As you know, we had some of the highest turnout in American history in 2020. So 2020 is a hard baseline to compare ourselves to, but this is a very robust early vote. And what's really exciting is that we're also seeing, many young people all across the country participate.
Speaking of young people, I did want to get into the demographics within these broad totals. So 50 million is the top line. What is standing out to you in terms of what percent of the early vote is young or Gen Z versus millennial versus boomer?
Well, what's standing out to us at Vote.org, we've already registered over 2 million people. And there's always this question of how do you get people from registration all the way to the ballot box? And will you see disturbances in between? There are things that we can't control. For instance, in North Carolina, there were huge storms. But what's interesting is that those storms and the hurricane didn't really stop people from registering, and it's not stopping people from early voting. We're seeing numbers that contextually are pretty equal with what we saw in North Carolina, even without storms happening. So I think we are noticing that there are more women that are coming out to vote. Not surprising this year, considering many women have seen rights rolled back, and I think maybe are participating because of that. We will see. We're seeing higher numbers of women. We are seeing higher numbers of young people. We've seen the largest spike in 18-year-olds registering that we've ever seen. At Vote.org, we've registered over 400,000 18-year-olds. And now the big question with early vote is how many of them are going to come out for early voting versus vote on election day. They tend to vote a little bit more on election day, so we're going to see even higher numbers of participation come out come election day.
I was going to ask, when you talk about early voting versus voting on election day, this enthusiasm that we're seeing, does this indicate to you that we're going to have even more people voting on election day, or is this effectively cannibalizing the election day vote and the final vote totals will end up similar, if not lower, than 2020?
2020 is a very challenging baseline because it was one of the largest turnout years in U.S. history, and I do think that we're going to continue to see people participating all the way through election day. What's different about early voting this year is that you do have a higher mix of Republicans that are also early voting. Traditionally, a lot of Republicans have voted on election day itself. And this year there are some higher numbers voting in early voting. So it's sort of a mixed bag. And the real question is, do we see, a surge, later on election day? I think we're going to see momentum that continues all the way through this year. I think a lot of people, there are also laws that are affecting some of this. We've seen expansions in some states of vote by mail, for instance. And so there are some states where people are going ahead and relying on vote by mail a little bit more than in past election cycles. But we have seen other states that have restricted vote by mail and made it more challenging for absentee requests. And in those states, it'll be interesting to see if you see higher participation on election day.
So when you talk about some of the demographics that you're seeing turn out, you mentioned young people, you mentioned women. How does that change when you look state to state? You mentioned North Carolina. Is that a trend just in North Carolina, or is this a trend we're also seeing in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida?
That's an excellent question. I do think we see a state-by-state story that is starting to emerge, depending on the laws in the state and how people are accessing the ballot box. We saw really high participation in early vote in the first days of early vote in Pennsylvania, for instance, and now you've seen it get a little bit quieter. We've seen early vote hold consistent in North Carolina. We saw record-breaking first day in Georgia of early voting. So I think that's an excellent question to see how exactly each state shapes up. But I think that we forget sometimes that everyone is voting under a different set of laws and rules set by the state. So how you access it. For instance, in Indiana, where I'm from, you can early vote, but you cannot vote by mail unless you're 65 or older. That means that the early vote locations right now, my polling location has a 3-hour wait time as we speak. And so that makes it, more challenging to early vote. I myself will be even more likely to vote closer to election day as those lines start to get a little bit better. So it really is kind of about the process and the system that you're working your way through.
And as you look at the differences in early voting among political parties, you alluded to this earlier, we have more Republicans early voting this year compared to the 2020 cycle. Does that spell trouble for Vice President Kamala Harris? And should Donald Trump, former President Trump, be happy that some of these early vote totals are showing more Republicans are coming out? Or again, is it too soon to say?
It's a little soon to say. It looks like right now, early vote, if you look at some of the data by Target Smart, it looks like as far as party identification, that some of the early vote is modeling a little bit heavier towards Democrats. But with Republicans, as I said before, voting in larger numbers in early vote than they did before, it seems like this year Republicans have not stuck by their past stance that you should vote on election day, but are instead taking advantage of early voting rules and having people move their plan to vote up and banking those. There is a question about whether some of the people who, traditionally also were Republicans and voted by mail are now participating in early voting. I think that's also a possibility. So hard to say completely what all of this means for the outcome of the election, but it is quite clear that people have, on both sides of the aisle, have moved up their plans to vote. And where you used to be able to see early vote and know that was probably modeled toward Democrats, now you can't make those same assumptions anymore.
Now, you mentioned that you have signed up, registered 400,000 first-time voters or 18-year-old voters. Can you dig into those numbers a little bit and how that compares to prior cycles?
Yes, this is a much larger number of 18-year-olds compared to 2020. And 2020, we saw some of the highest participation in registration. So this is a phenomenal increase among 18-year-olds. And 18-year-olds traditionally are the most difficult demographic to engage and to get to register. And so we know that once somebody participates when they're 18, they're more likely to show up again and become a lifelong voter. If we can get them to participate in 2 election cycles or more, voting's like a habit, we can keep them for the long haul, which is great for strengthening our democracy, our U.S. democracy, and belief in our system of government. These 18-year-olds, I think, are being reached in a few different ways. We're trying to reach them in the places and spaces where they already are. That's on college campuses or social media platforms. We have a great partnership with Snapchat where they're pushing people right now. Today is early vote day, pushing people to go ahead and plan their vote and to vote early. And I think that through some of these partnerships and through that direct outreach work, we're really seeing these numbers take off. And we also really noticed that when the vice president became the nominee organically, there was a huge surge in youth registration. So I think people are excited this year. And I think 18-year-olds have really connected the dots between the future that they want to see or build and the fact that you have to show up to vote.
Now, you said today is early voting day, and it was a few weeks ago that we had National Voter Registration Day. But I want to ask what might feel like a basic question, but is it too late for someone to register to vote if they are watching this and thinking, yikes, I haven't gotten around to it? It's October 29th, the election's in a week. Are there places they can still register?
Absolutely. You can go to vote.org and we give you all the rules and dates and deadlines in every state, but about half the states and Washington, D.C. have same day voter registration too. So in many places, you can show up to register to vote in person and cast your ballot. So you want to look to see if you live in one of those states. And if you do, you can go ahead and register all the way up till Election Day.
Now, I saw you tweeted last night, with only 8 days until the election, remind your audience that they don't need millions of followers to make a difference. Can you talk about why you felt the need to post this on social media? And you had some facts and figures with this that I thought were really interesting. But what compelled you to say this to your audience?
I think the thing is, everybody sees the big influencers that get involved in the election cycle, and we are all so grateful for the way that they use their platforms and the way that they model how to use your platform. Taylor Swift and Beyonce's of the world, and all of the different artists that show up to tell people to stay civically engaged, and that's really exciting. And I want everyone out there to feel agency and making sure that their friends and their family are civically engaged, because the best messenger for voting and for civics and for protection of access to the ballot box in our democracy is actually you talking to the people that you love. So I want to encourage everyone to become the vote captain of their friends, their family, their street, their school. Get everyone engaged. Once you have your plan to vote and you're registered, make sure you get 3 to 5 friends and realize that your platform is as powerful with the people who love you as anyone's. And so that direct ask and that direct outreach is so important. And I think that sometimes when it comes to a presidential election, people feel like, it's so big and there's so much and what can I really do? And the truth is, every single thing you do will be important. It'll strengthen what's happening in your neighborhood, your town, your city, your state. And we forget that there are thousands of local elections going on all across the country as well. So presidential may take up all of this big space, but you want to make sure your friends and family are registered and that they're showing up to vote, because there's school board elections happening, city council elections happening, judicial elections happening, and all of those things will affect everybody's day-to-day experience. So we're all influencers. It's just a matter of who you're influencing and if you've really asked them to participate.
I like that. Become the vote captain for your block, for your school, for your family. I'm wondering, Andrea, is there a message that has been most effective in talking to some folks who think that their vote doesn't matter? For instance, I saw someone on social media say that she's been going around knocking on doors, and someone said, like, oh, my vote doesn't matter. And her response to them was, well, in your state, 70,000 votes made the difference between who won and who lost last cycle. So it's really a much narrower margin of victory in some places. Is that the effective message, or is it something else that you have found really helps move people?
I think a few things. If you don't vote, it doesn't mean that that something isn't happening. It just means that you don't have a voice in the decision. Politicians aren't afraid to disappoint people who don't vote. So making sure that your voice is heard and that people know that you exist is a really important thing. And you don't want to, cede control of decisions over you, your family, your body to people that to people without having a voice in that. I think that the other message that really works is to tell people. Many elections have come down to a handful of votes in this country. A few years ago, the entire control of the Virginia state legislature came down to a tied vote. So they did a coin toss to decide control of the state legislature. Like many, there are thousands of elections that come down to 100 people or less. So it's really, really important to participate. Your vote does matter. It does count, and it certainly counts in those local elections. So show up for the presidential and then vote all the way up and down the ballot to make sure that you're really having a say in what's going on in your community. But the biggest thing is there are people out there now who are trying to keep you from voting. There are 2 types of people in our country: those who believe in free and fair elections and those who believe in some other style of government. And the only way we can protect the rights that we were all born with, is to keep showing up time and time again, and maintain participation levels so that we can continuously have access to the ballot box, because it is not guaranteed. So realizing that it's not guaranteed and that the way to protect it is to show up also helps.
I also wanted to ask you, because as editor of ForbesWomen, I talk to a lot of women. I see a lot of women's circles on social media and on the internet as a whole. And there's become this kind of Post-it note movement, if you will, with people writing on Post-it notes that they go in bathroom stalls saying, your husband does not have to know how you voted. And it's the supporters of one candidate over another who are saying this. But are you at vote.org getting questions about who sees my ballot and is my ballot really private? Because I don't remember seeing this in prior election cycles, reminding people that their vote is theirs and theirs alone. Can you talk about this movement a little bit?
I think many people out there tend to vote, especially women traditionally have voted sometimes the way their spouses want them to. And it's important in this day and age to remember everyone's voice really matters and everyone has independent thoughts of their own. And so showing up on election day, no one can tell who you voted for. They can only tell if you voted or not. So I think that becomes really important, and everybody realizing that they have agency in the choices that are coming up and that they're going to make, is important. This is a whole new generation of women, and I think there's a lot of fear out there at times that somehow people can tell how you vote or know what you're doing. And it's just absolutely not true. But I think that we get questions about this at vote.org for sure. People want to know if their neighbors can tell if they voted or not. And yes, we can tell if you voted. We cannot tell who you voted for. And I think that's important for everyone to know as they go to the ballot box this November.
You mentioned some of the down ballot races. It's not just about the presidential race. There are a lot of local elections. If I'm someone who has no clue what the ballot measures are, what my local elections are, what's the best way for me to learn 1 week out?
We have a tool on vote.org. You can go right to our website, and it's called What's on My Ballot. You put your address in, and we can show you everything that's on your ballot, so you can look up everything all the way down to school board race data. You could take the time then to Google around, see the candidates that share your values. And if you want to, you can make your choices and print out a form so you'll have it with you. But our What's on My Ballot tool is really the best way to find out before getting to the voting booth exactly who's running in your local community. And we hope that it's a resource that everyone will share after they use it, share it with your friends and family.
We've covered a lot of ground, but is there anything else the Forbes audience should know about what you're seeing at vote.org, either in terms of the number of people who've registered this cycle or who have already voted, and what that means for Election Day?
We're seeing engagement that is much higher than the midterm elections, about double what we saw in the midterm elections, which is a great sign. It means that people are out there participating, voting, and care about what is going on all around this country and at the local level. We hope everyone out there shows up to the polls this year and helps us maintain a strong and healthy democracy. And a strong and healthy democracy just means that we all have the freedom and ability to show up, to vote, and to choose the people who lead us instead of having our leaders choose who can vote. So I think that the biggest thing is long term, we have to think in this country about how do we get to 80% participation? How do we build systems that make it so that everyone can get through, so people aren't stuck like I am in a 3-hour line trying to vote? Every voting experience should be able to be a half hour or so. So long term, those are some of the things that we all can dig in on. And in the short term, we all show up. Let's show up this November. It's already happening. The American public's already charged. So I think that the thing is just to continue the momentum.
Andrea Hailey, thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your time and your insight at this crucial moment in American politics.
Thank you. Take care.